What happens when somebody does something horrible and then you find out that they've been using the same word you've been using to describe something horrible? I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, there's a big story in the New York Times about how the El Paso killer, the shooter there, under their headline, it says, echoed the incendiary words of conservative media stars. And the primary words that they're talking about are words like invaders and invasion to refer to illegal aliens coming into this country, specifically Hispanic immigrants. And they chronicle the use of this language that is a word or term that is used in this manifesto that the El Paso shooter allegedly posted about a half a dozen times, as it was used by various Fox News personalities and others, including Tucker Carlson, Pat Buchanan, Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, Laura Ingraham, and there were a number of others, I think, including Herman Cain and Louis Gohmert, who are politicians, maybe even Lindsey Graham. I apologize to anybody I've slurred there who didn't actually use that term. Bill, this gets into a kind of a sticky situation because the last thing in the world you want is your political party to be associated with something that is associated with a mass murderer. No?
No, it does not get into a sticky situation at all. This is the left basically doing everything they can to silence conservatives, to get them to shut up, and to convince their people that we really do live in this Nazi state where at any given time the rhetoric of the president is just moments away from the beginning of the mass executions that are undoubtedly going to follow. There's nothing pointy about this. There's nothing sticky about it at all. This person, this individual, went on a murder rampage. That's the person who's responsible for the murder rampage. It doesn't matter if he addressed it as a love letter to Barack Obama. It doesn't make Barack Obama responsible for it. And there is no action to be taken, because if there is action to be taken, then that action means that people have to show up. When they say shut up, they mean conservatives. So this whole idea that this guy was pushed into it by this inflammatory rhetoric is not only what the left does all the time, it's kind of what they believe. They believe that people are automatons who are programmed by society and who will do whatever basically the last thing they hear enter their heads. And so I categorically reject that description of people. I think most Americans categorically reject that description of people. I think there were 28 shootings under the Barack Obama administration compared to something like 9 for George W. Bush. Does that mean Barack Obama incited all those people to violence? It means nothing. It means nothing. The person who's responsible for shooting other people is the person that pulled the trigger. And to say that his manifesto represents that of any of the people that you mentioned in that list of names is just gutterball politics. Doesn't
Bill,
surprise
even if
me.
we're not saying that this kind of language, it's even if you agree that the shooter is responsible for the shooter's actions and no one else is responsible for the shooter's actions, the point of the New York Times story was really the disturbing way that, and I didn't even mention the president, but that the president's rhetoric, and that is picked up and echoed in Fox News and talk radio, of Hispanic migrants as invaders is so on track with what white nationalists believe, forget about the shooter guy, that you would think that the Republican Party would want to move away from that kind of terminology.
Scott, we haven't heard the term white nationalism until about 6 months ago, something like that. Right around the time the Russia probe came back and showed nothing, we started to hear about white nationalism, and we've heard some really, really, really hilarious examples of white nationalism. One of them being, if you broadcast something on 8th of August, that'd be 8/8, which looks an awful lot like HH, which stands for Heil Hitler. See how pernicious it is? If you're gonna take the case that we have to abandon our ability to have a conversation about anything using language appropriate or inappropriate, doesn't matter. If you're saying that we have to abandon this in order to prevent these shootings, what you're basically doing is we're going to throw away the First Amendment to cover the fact that these shooters continue to do what they do for a very simple reason, and that reason is because of 24-hour coverage by people like CNN and papers like the New York Times. They're trying to shift the burden of this onto Donald Trump or conservatives or anybody they don't like, when in point of fact, forensic psychologists for the FBI say that the one single greatest contributor to people individually acting on it is the sense that they get to be worldwide famous, and the greatest single contributor to them as a group of people is that virtually every single one of them are fatherless boys. So rather than look at that, if you want to look at causality, we'll look at anything else. And if the banning the guns thing's not getting any traction, then by all means, let's blame it on President Trump and blame it on conservatives and people who say that people who come across our border illegally, sometimes 10,000s of them at a time with weapons, to refer to that as an invasion is somehow what caused this guy to go off his rocker. It is an invasion.
Again, Bill, we're not saying that that's what caused the guy to go off his rocker. What we're saying is that the kind of stuff in that screed, which has been echoed by other people who are part of white supremacist movements, white nationalist movements, neo-Nazis, things like that, it would seem to me that a respectable political party does not need to employ the language of invasion when it's talking about an immigration problem in order to get its point across. If you would say, yes, they do have to use that language, then one might ask, why is it after multiple years of using the invasion language from all of those talk radio hosts and the president himself, it doesn't seem to be engendering any increased support among the populace of this country, and it's doing nothing but antagonizing a lot of good people who've come here legally and just want to be left alone?
We've been talking about this thing of it being an invasion has been an invasion throughout the Obama administration, and Donald Trump's entire pre-election campaign promise, his singular promise, was to build a wall, and the wall is to protect us from this invasion of illegal aliens. So what's happening now is now you're saying, boy, I don't know if the party wants to be associated with words like invasion. Maybe we'd better just soften our tone a little bit, and maybe we should stop calling them illegal aliens, and maybe we should stop calling it an invasion, and maybe we should refer to them as undocumented dreamers, and maybe we should start to say things like, it's not an invasion, it's simply minimally invited group migration across borders that are under dispute anyway. Whatever you want to say, doesn't matter. What they're trying to do is they're trying to make, as always, whatever hay they can out of this. And when the shooter turns out to be a liberal, what does that mean? What does it mean? Does it mean that the hateful rhetoric against Donald Trump and conservatives, look, Scotty, the actual violence is being committed in this country is violence against conservatives by progressives. People getting their hats knocked off, people getting beaten up, people getting fired from their jobs, all of that stuff. It's all a one-way street. So when you get a guy who comes down and shoots up a bunch of people for whatever insane reason he's got, they want to make as much hay out of this as possible. I'm not going to allow it. I'm just not. I'm not going to allow the premise. I'm not going to allow the premise that we all have to watch what we say because of the craziest, most trigger-happy lunatic in the entire country. If the metric for what our ability to speak about in this country is that everything we say in public has to be censored and measured and tuned so that the most insane person in America doesn't go off on it, then you get exactly what the left wants, which is a one-party state with a one-party line on what everything is happening, and then people like this who rebel against a socialist state, needless to say, are criminally insane. And this is about the only thing I agree with the left on that. But this is an entire effort to suppress freedom of speech and to suppress the argument, and it's clear to me and it's clear to most conservatives.
Well, Bill, maybe you could acknowledge that there may be a better way to describe this that doesn't seem to be an echo of what some of the racists are using in this sense. Invasion certainly is a term, or invader is a term that could be used in the sense of somebody just moving into someone else's sphere. But typically it's used in a military sense. It's more like guns blazing coming across somebody's border. And while there is some criminal activity coming across the border, that's not primarily what we're talking about. In most cases, we're talking about women and children showing up at the gates and surrendering voluntarily to border security guards. Isn't there a better way to describe this, Bill, that doesn't have to conjure these people as if they were enemies trying to attack us?
No. There isn't a better way.
They want to be our neighbors.
Hold on. There are parts of the southern United States where the federal government put up signs saying that American citizens were at risk to enter those areas because of the presence of armed Mexican drug smugglers and people smugglers. We were told as American citizens, you shouldn't go there because if you do, there's a good chance you'll get shot by guys coming over the border with AK-47s. So when you see enough guys coming over the border with AK-47s, that's an invasion. And I'm not going to back that term down, and we don't need to back that term down. What the left is trying to accuse us of is dehumanizing these people. And I haven't seen any of that. Now, if President Trump had said, we've got to stop these roaches from invading our country, then you'd have something. But he didn't say that. He didn't say that at all. He simply said it's an invasion. It's an armed invasion. It is. It is. And any single night on the border, there are people crossing into this country with automatic weapons. And I don't want to hear how that's not an invasion. That's the only word for it. So if the people who
So that's what you're talking about. When you use the term invasion, or when other mainstream or right-wing media personalities use the term invasion, they are specifically referring to the armed criminals who are coming across the border?
No.
Not just the masses of migrants?
No. I am talking about the fact that this country is being flooded on a daily basis by people, some of whom have weapons, but that doesn't really make those weapons haven't been fired yet. Whether they were firing, in other words, whether they had weapons or not, it would still be an invasion. What else do you call it? What do you call it, Scott? If you call it, what you tell me what we should call it.
So even if he just wants to go to the Lowe's parking lot and wait for some guy to pick him up so he can go put a roof on a house somewhere.
Okay, so what should we call this ongoing 30-year-old flood of illegal immigrants coming into the country over our southern border every night for the last 30 years? What should we call that?
So let me turn it around then.
No.
No, that's a rhetorical question, Bill, which I was asking you in the first place.
I am asking you what we should call it.
I have not done a search of the thesaurus to find a better word because, frankly, I don't feel like I use that term to describe what's happening, so I don't need an alternative.
So when you say you haven't done a search of the thesaurus to find a term to use in place of invasion, what you're telling me is you can't think of a term to use in place of invasion because invasion is the best word for what we're seeing.
Now that you press me on the question, I think even a term like mass migration.
Mass migration. Let's stop right there. A mass migration is in terms of nature, is a biological move from one place to another that a species accomplish in order to breed or in order to find food or whatever the case may be, and they migrate back again. That's why it's called a migration. So this isn't a migration. It's nothing like a migration. Migration sounds harmless, and migration sounds friendly and nice, and migration sounds like the kind of thing that we should allow to continue, but this isn't a migration. Nobody's migrating back, so it's not a migration. What else you got?
So, no, I don't have anything else because, frankly, that's not the purpose of this show, for me to come up with words to change your language and Rush Limbaugh's language and Sean Hannity's language.
Hold the phone here, pal. You and your role as Mr. Progressive interrogator is, in fact, precisely asking us to change our language. As a matter of fact, that's what predicated this response in the first place. What word would you use in place of invasion? And I told you I don't have a word in place of invasion. And you said, well,
the real question isn't whether or not there is another term, but whether you think it might be worth finding another term.
Why? Why do we have to find another term?
Well, if you read the New York Times article, I think you will discover that you need to find another term because white nationalists and white supremacists and El Paso shooter type people are using that as their favored terminology to describe what's happening at our southern border. And it might be better not to echo their screeds in your civil dialogue.
So the perfectly legal, legitimate, nonviolent, patriotic people of this country who are aware of what's going on here and have been aware of it for a long time, we have to modify our language because some lunatic shot up a place or because some Nazi scumbags or whatever other people happen to be using the term. We just have to adjust our language. We have to change our language. We have to back up. We have to stop. We have to bow our heads. We have to agree. We have to do all of these other things that we've been doing for all of this time, and I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. That guy in his manifesto, I'm sure he used the word invaders, and he used a bunch of other words too. And maybe one of those words is and. And I'm not going to get rid of the word and because it appeared in this guy's screed. I'm not going to get rid of the word and because it appears in white nationalist literature. I didn't produce that literature, and I didn't pull the trigger on anybody. I'm not changing my language because of what other people do, and I'm certainly not changing my language in order to accommodate what some people might do. The fact that white nationalists use those terms doesn't make me a white nationalist. It means somebody else is using the same term as I do. They're using the same language. Every single word in their manifestos is the same words as I use. It's just that they want us to put this one away because this one conveys what actually is going on in the same way that raping children is what you really mean when you say he molested that child.
So can we turn this around on the New York Times now and come at it from what I think your perspective would be? Because it occurred to me after reading this story that they located some terminology that is shared. You can do this with LexisNexis searches and do word studies and all that kind of stuff and create a word cloud. And they located some language that is shared between conservatives on Fox News, for example, or on talk radio, and some language that is used in this racist screed that the El Paso shooter used. And then they basically said, well, there is an association here. But it wonders me, as my Pennsylvania Dutch relatives used to say, whether we could do the same thing with other words and link those up to people on the other side of the political aisle. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
it seems
I do.
to me
Why
that
don't we I do see exactly what you mean. Why don't we start with a word that's getting an awful lot of play around here lately? Why don't we start with the word socialist? How many avowed socialists are there now in the Democratic candidates for president? At least one, and we know that virtually all of them are giving it lip service and kind of agreeing to it. So most, if not all, of the Democratic presidential candidates are in favor of some form of socialism or another. Well, socialism has killed 200 million people, Scotty. Didn't kill 16 people, didn't kill 20 people, killed 200 million people. That term should be as repugnant as fascism or Nazism is, because the death toll under socialism is orders of magnitude. I think it's 2 orders of magnitude greater than what the Nazis accomplished. And so we're using that term all the time. So why don't I just simply say, hey, you know what, guys? You're going to have to think of another term for socialism, because socialism under National Socialism in Germany resulted in the death of 6 million Jews executed, another 6 million homosexuals and intellectuals and so on executed. 52 million people died in that war. And socialism was the term that they applied to themselves in the Soviet Union. It wasn't the Union of Communist, it wasn't the Union of Communist Republics. It was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So they used the term socialism too. And all of the murders that took place under that regime is on that word as well. So is this what we're going to do? Is this the plan now? Is that we're going to retire words from language because somebody did something and used a word that we are now going to retire from the English language because what one of the most insane people in our society decided to go out and do? I'm not buying it. I'm not only not buying it, I think the whole idea is disgusting, repugnant, and carefully calibrated to try to gin up hatred and support against conservatives. And I don't think there's any question about it. So if the New York Times is saying that there are certain words that are off limits because they might affect somebody and might cause somebody to pick up a gun and start shooting people, and God knows we don't want that. What other words are off limits? What other words are forbidden for us to use in the course of our conversation in a country that was free one day? I remember that day very well.
That seems like it's the heart of the matter, Bill, and we'll close with this because it seems like fundamentally the argument is over whether words themselves are so dangerous and divisive that they could destroy the republic. And you might dismiss that out of hand and say, well, you know, sticks and stones and words may never hurt me and all that. But words built this republic. Words created this republic. The Constitution, the Declaration were really the words that brought this into being. So why not accept the premise that it's possible that if we're too loose with our tongues, we could possibly tear the country apart?
The words that made up the Constitution brought what into being?
The words brought the United States of America into being, not the idea. I know where you're going with this.
No.
It instantiated into existence.
The words that you just said that it was words that created the United States, so therefore words could conceivably destroy it. So therefore we have to look at whether or not we need to ban some words.
Fundamentally, it's a republic of words. It doesn't exist without the Constitution.
What the words produced was not a government. The words produced the protection of the freedom of the people who created that government to say whatever they damn well want to, whenever they damn well wanted to. That is the entire reason for America. It's the secret of all of our success, and it's the only reason we're here. It's free speech is an expression of free thought. And if you want to terrorize people, you got to be careful. You don't want to say that word. That word's associated with national. Now you're not only affecting their speech, you're affecting their thinking, and you're making them afraid to speak out what's on their mind and use regular English words in the United States of America. In the United States of America, you're talking about this. You're talking about pulling words out of the language, just like they did with Ingsoc, which was English socialism, in 1984. This word could upset somebody, so we better not use that word anymore. I think we ought to plaster every single bus that we can find with a big poster in big black letters against a white background that says, "Stop the invasion." That's what I think we ought to do. Because this business of kowtowing and backing up and whining and agreeing and just constantly granting this insane premise in the first place is nuts. If you really think that listening to somebody on the radio or somebody on TV, that Rachel Maddow could say something that would make me go out and start shooting up people in Santa Monica, if you believe that's how people are built, you're in the wrong frickin' country. Okay? It's just that simple. It's just that simple.
It is amazing, and we'll end with this. It is amazing that the New York Times article isn't a reasoned argument about how there's no real invasion happening, or that invasion is not the proper word to describe what is happening. It goes immediately to the association between the word invasion and neo-Nazis and white supremacists and white nationalists and President Trump and Fox News.
And to make this point crystal clear,
that's the technique that's being used to take that out of the realm of civil dialogue and into the realm of rage, anger, frustration, and tearing people apart.
And simply to make sure that this particular issue has a stake driven through its miserable black heart. If I use the term invasion to talk about what's happening on our southern border, and a white nationalist organization uses the term invasion to talk about what's happening on the southern border, well, what's the difference between the two? Well, the difference between the two is that I say that people are coming here. There's an invasion of people coming to America. They say that there's an invasion of brown-skinned vermin. They say that there's an invasion of cockroaches. They say that it's an invasion of any number of other things that dehumanize people. And that's the difference between the two positions, not the word invasion. The word invasion it's simply these things make me so angry that I just sometimes don't know how to finish talking about it, because I just want to smash people's faces with this rhetorically. I just want to take them up close and say, if you were saying that language controls behavior, then you have just written the entire justification for 1984 and every fascist, authoritarian, murderous state in human history that this country was designed to be the antithesis of. And I'm not gonna let it happen here. I'm not.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're grateful to the members at BillWhittle.com who make this show possible. And for those of you who haven't caught on to the idea here yet, we don't settle for pat answers. We're not just sitting here trying to listen to ourselves repeat talking points within our little bubble of conservatives, but rather we're challenging the fundamental ideas of conservatism with the arguments of the left and progressivism and dealing with those in real time. These questions are frankly ambush, provocative questions that are designed to force Bill into the position of being able to think on his feet, because we need you and everybody else to be able to think on their feet when they face that in the marketplace every day. We're grateful to the members of BillWhittle.com who make it possible for us to do this. And if you'd like to become one of them, go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this possible.
And thanks especially to Scott Ott, who hates Satan as much as I do and constantly has to be his representative on a daily basis on this show.